I want to double click on what you said about the AI part of it. I ran into a company the other day that did try to use AI to write it, and like they just went straight into ChatGPT, typed in a control, and it spit it out. And I've talked to a couple companies, and I'll come back around on this because I'm as ADD as Kenny.
I love this.
So I'm going to come back to that in just a second. We know each other. But just to say, like, our policy is actually very, very simple. It's a one-sentence policy. Never use AI for anything you can't validate. Right? That's it. You don't have to say anything else, period. So they used ChatGPT to write their package and failed the audit miserably. They're like, but I copied everything word for word.
How that works.
How did we fail the audit? I was like, let me see it. And I started reading. I was like, whoa, what was the prompt?
Give me FedRAMP. Give me FedRAMP now.
But this goes back to the right tools in the right hands is a powerful thing.
Hey, what's up? Welcome, everybody. It is another Paramified podcast. Kenny Scott and
Mike Schreiner. Thanks for being here.
And our awesome homie, friend, partner, Martin Rieger, StackArmor. I love you, man. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And Martin drove all the way out from Washington, D.C. just to see us. No other reason.
Yep. He set up the trailer and everything, right? Honey, we're going to Utah.
Made a little stop in Vegas on the way, but
yeah.
Did you make
the roundabout way?
Vegas and Moab?
Vegas and Moab. Did you make a lot of money in Vegas this time?
No. No.
Well, that sucks. What are we going to talk about?
Normally I do pretty well there, but not much gambling. We were there for Google Next.
Oh.
So yeah, work with some play.
Well, eventually you'll make a lot of money from that.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Yep.
A little longer on the return.
Yeah. Yeah. You're going to become the house in this one.
Yes.
Okay.
It's awesome.
Or the banker.
Wins either way. We'll dive more into that. You guys announced some cool stuff out at Google Next.
Yes, we did. We'll
talk about it. For those that don't know Martin, so Martin is definitely an OG when it comes to FedRAMP, government cybersecurity in general. Have been a part of, what did you tell us earlier, 300 FedRAMP engagements?
Yep.
Crazy.
As assessor, advisor, different shapes, sizes, and flavors, but full stacks up down to SaaS providers. But in the beginning, it was mostly infrastructures as the foundation was kind of laid. And looking back, that was kind of the most logical choice. Everybody had to have a place to host. Most folks couldn't. But once all the infrastructures were established and the hyperscalers were in place, things kind of really, I would say, took off for FedRAMP. And that's when you saw the number of CSPs kind of skyrocket.
Yeah. Yeah. So take us back to the beginning. Take us through the origin story. How'd you get into this? Where did it all begin?
Oh, man. Where did it begin? Well, I would say for me, in many ways, it began in the Navy. I was a Navy IT. And when I got out of the Navy, I got into the business of cybersecurity. So when I was in the Navy, I was in IT. And I was given the task of accrediting 3 of the systems I was responsible for. Did it in a couple weeks because I kind of saw the pieces and how they fit. So I worked for CACI back then, and they said, hey, we have this information assurance division that needs help. Over the next 3 years, did around 130 systems, and ended up moving up to Virginia in 2012 to build out an A&A program for Air Force Medical Services. And came across a company called Coalfire. Tom McAndrew was a junior VP there at the time and mentioned that they wanted to establish a 3PAO and get a presence and enter the market. So they were one of the first 8 3PAOs out there. Had a great presence as PCI, SOC 1, SOC 2, HIPAA High Trust, and things like that. So we had a good foundation to work with in terms of a customer base to try to get this FedRAMP thing going.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the tools that were available back then when you're doing these accreditations in 2 to 3 weeks. That's actually pretty impressive that you're able to do that, or was it? Is it not? Is it not impressive?
No, so that period we're talking about is like 2008 to 12.
Yeah.
From that perspective, these were DIACAPs.
Oh, tell us more about that. We love
So that was the
DIACAPs.
DoD's flavor that preceded RMF, or Risk Management Framework. So DIACAP was the Defense Information Assurance Certification Accreditation Program, and it had kind
And
of
that spun off of something else, right?
DITSCAP.
DITS.
Which was even
yes,
worse.
the DITS. Yeah.
Oh man.
DITSCAP. DITS.
Yeah, it's like I think that the DoD kept sort of reinventing itself.
Were the templates good back then?
Yeah, you had MAC levels, or mission assurance certification levels. I don't think it was a bad process. It was just so difficult for folks to understand. I think FISMA and RMF and 853 is a lot easier to digest. And once the DoD finally did adopt it, things kind of smoothed out. But we had a bumper sticker on Millington that we made that said DIACAP, it pays the bills, because we all hated our jobs. But it paid so well. What are you going to do?
It's funny how that works out.
It's funny how it works.
There's a little FedRAMP overtone ring in there for you.
Sometimes if you're good at things that nobody else wants to do, you get paid a lot to do them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that is actually interesting. So you kind of figured it out really early, it sounds like, in your career in IT, that like, hey, if I can make this thing suck less, this thing that's really hard for other people to do, and they're making bumper stickers that say DIACAP, it pays the bills, right? That's where you dive into opportunity. I was just talking to my kids on vacation for a while, and they're all like, oh, I'm going to do what I'm passionate about, right? And so they're like all like saying professional sports, and I'm like, dude, I'm 5'8", and like and I mean, I've seen you run, and so I love my kids, right? But like anyways, but that is actually a superpower, just to double click on that, right off the bat, is find wherever you are and just dive into solving the problem. And
well, and to answer your question on the tools, the usual suspects, Excel sheets and Word docs, and there were a lot of macros built around them that did speed things up a little bit. But from a POAM management, plan of action and milestones and maintaining, I mean, that goes all the way back to 06. But from that perspective, the Excel sheets and the 850-page, Word docs drove everybody nuts. We've been dealing with that for 20 years, right? And I think, that's sort of what led to our connection and partnership, is the ability to do it better, more efficiently. I don't know why someone didn't put a database behind it sooner. Or because I think everybody's talked about it, but just nobody took the time.
Yeah. We met, with that. I can't remember. You
need Martin to tell the story about how you guys met.
Story. And I think I did send you the photos. So it was the 4th annual NIST OSCAL conference in DC. I forget the name of the facility, but it was one of those 200-year-old auditoriums.
Reagan, or it was across this Commerce.
Yes. And I mean, they had the wooden seats, and it like you literally felt like you were in the 18th Congress kind of thing.
Yep.
So
everybody in their suits. I remember.
Yep.
I was not in my suit.
Well, so Kenny's the last speaker. Everybody else is gone. Google went up there and just displayed this insane OSCAL solution they came up with, and then at the end they're like, yeah, but you can't have it. We created this. It's amazing. Here's how we're doing it. Not for public consumption, right? So Kenny gets up there, and you can see they're kind of fidgeting with the projector and the slides, and he keeps looking, and he's like, well, okay. He's like, hi, everybody. I'm Kenny. I'm with Paramify. We make FedRAMP not suck. My slides don't work, so I don't want to keep anybody from happy hour. So just, if you want to talk, come see me. And then it was over, and I was like, yes. It was fantastic, man. And I was taking pictures, sending them back to Johan and the team. I'm like, I love this guy. This is hilarious. Because, I mean, you made the most of the situation, but what else are you going to do, right? So went down. I think we met, and, the rest is history. But it was clear the direction you were going and what you were doing. And I think we got it right away because OSCAL is what it is, right? And I think all your listeners are familiar enough. But aside from the way the rest of the world is using it, because the rest of the world is using OSCAL for different things, ISO has completely adopted it. You guys know the financial industry is very much dipping their toe in the so it for us, because of the way that our solution works, right? The ability to have kind of prefabbed OSCAL packages, so to speak, that are already 60 to 70% of the way there, because we're providing, depending on low, moderate, high, or DoD IL4 or 5, or even CMMC, ready to go solutions that are for the most part pre-documented. So what makes the most sense? Drop them in an OSCAL environment, right? And at that time, that's where we're going, and that's what we were hunting for, is we need a good solution for this that's going to stand up. But the ability to migrate from, say, Rev 4 to Rev 5, legacy FedRAMP templates, or even nowadays 171 to CMMC and things like that, that's where I think the market is so mature in solutions that this is the next obvious evolution.
Yeah, we were really excited about a standard that we could use that other people were also interested in adopting, because everybody has their own Excel spreadsheets. Everybody has their own, how many leaf nodes does this control program have? And I was really excited to say, like, oh yeah, here's a standard. And NIST actually had done a lot of work on like how to build out a control catalog and how to build out a control profile. All of that stuff made a ton of sense for me. And so I'm like, yeah, this makes a ton of sense. Let's do that. Let's do that thing. And if you have a standard and you're focused on helping people adopt that standard, you make it easy for people to use it, import it, export it, and any magic you're doing should be, speaking that language. And so that has been a huge benefit for Paramify. And even if it changes a lot, it doesn't matter. What we want is a digital standard that other people can use and adopt and not worry about it. I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools, so go back to 2008. As let's say StackArmor's in 2008, it'd be a little bit different, or it'd be a little bit different. Now you guys have a lot of advanced tools that you guys set up. What's it like doing an ATO in 2008? Is S3 covered in GovCloud
This is awesome, because you got to remember, so this is the beginning of back
Cloud.
then we're on the maturity level of virtualization and hypervisors, and back in the old days, you had to identify what hard drives and where something was located. It was like what rack. So, along with the device. So we used to just make up numbers. Is this being recorded? No, because the authorizing officials wanted to know where the virtual device was hosted. We're like, rack 6, blade 7. And so we would just ideally it was somewhere in that area.
He just said rack 7, blade 65.
But I guess to talk about the tools, I mean, as we move towards what eventually, or what had already been categorically defined as cloud, and I think there was a guy at Salesforce that got credit for that because he put it on a diagram and drew a cloud around it and so on. But tools and technology, where we are today compared to where we were then, I mean, scripted, automated gold disks were the standard, right? You create a gold disk image that DISA approved, right? They sent them out to you, and it was based on the different type of operating system, right? Whether it was server, desktop, or whatever, laptops. We were staking and hardening back then as well, every 60 days. Compared to today, where we have infrastructure as code and scripted, platform as code deployments, we're slowly working towards, as a government, compliance as code, right? So at StackArmor, our CEO, Gaurav Pal, GP, he's actually leading the continuous ATO effort, and they're also working towards compliance as code. So it's in its second phase, second milestone. But yeah, so tools and technology wise, I mean, yeah, back then we had, images, gold images, scripted deployments, etc. But today, we're deploying full environments, right, with full GSS or general support systems that includes auditing, logging, scanning, antivirus, malware, patch remediation, configuration management, full zero trust, everything that is required to secure an environment. To do what we're doing today, back then, we probably would have, they probably would have thought we were from another planet. But just to think about where we come from then.
Yeah. So you had golden images back then. It's just a lot of the standards expected things to never change ever. Like I love what Pete Waterman says about the the standard was written in like 2005, FISMA 2006, right? 2006, and I mean, it probably took a long time to build out that standard, but the standard was, hey, let's build out this system and let's ship it off to sea, and it's never going to change again, right? And that is absolutely not what it is today. And so we focus a lot on security capability, and that's why we love our partnership with StackArmor. That's where we connected. I'll never forget meeting Johan also over the phone. He's like, first off, I just want to tell you I hate GRC tools, and I'm like, oh, well, that's a really nice guitar there. You got, I'm like, let's build a relationship, because he just
That does sound like Johan.
I love that guy. All right, but it is focusing on capabilities first, right? So you mentioned all of those things, right? So what are you doing for log management? What are you doing for configuration management? What are you doing? We need to talk through some of those and just help people understand what it's like to not have someone who knows what's going on doing it.
Well,
You can
I
just get
have a
taken
customer I'm
advantage
not
of.
going to name, but I'll tell you, this was one of our early folks we took on, because StackArmor has been around for a while, but our current solution, Threat Alert, which is everything, we provide everything but the assessment. But the customer had basically said to me, I've been studying the NIST controls for 18 months.
Nice.
And I was like, yep, and you're still here. Which is to say, you can read the controls, right? There are, 22 families, 18 of them in FedRAMP, and you can read them all day long. But if you don't understand them or the spirit, not to mention, the controls are part of a broader spectrum, and FedRAMP is just an overlay. So is FISMA, so is RMF. The controls can be mapped back to CMMC. You can map them to ISO. So depending on the framework and how they're applied, right, you've got to understand the expectations and what's being asked of you. So to your point, like auditing and logging, centralized auditing and logging, or the AU family in general, it's tough to get through to commercial companies out there who have never been through anything compliance related, much less the concept of monitoring all of this and tracking it and keeping it all in one location, and then reviewing it daily, weekly, monthly, etc. I will tell you the biggest part of this is training and education. And we spend the bulk of our time not deploying. That happens very quickly. Implementation and migration of a customer solution also moves quickly. What takes the most time is teaching them to fish for themselves, so to speak, right? Even though we're doing all of this, it still belongs to them, and it's their responsibility. So if it wasn't for that piece, man, I think we would just be cranking them like hotcakes. But when you come across the customers that have had ISO, who have been through something like SOC 2 or HIPAA and high trust, who have at least some background and they've been audited, those move so much faster.
I love what you just said right there. That's really interesting. You have this opportunity, if you wanted to be like, oh yeah, let's just implement there. You're done. And then give them a sticker, right?
and a lollipop.
Yeah.
There you go.
Because there is a lot of outcome-based sales, right? Because it doesn't matter. It's 2025, and yes, we have AI that helps a little bit. But if you don't understand implementation and assurance and how those work together to build a world-class security program, you're going to be in a really tough spot. You can be taken advantage of. And so there's all these firms and tools out there, we don't have to name them, that sell this outcome of like, hey, you don't know what you're doing. That's okay. Our SaaS tool, or we're gonna do it for you. So you hate compliance? Like, great. So do we. We'll get it for you, and we'll get you a sticker, and you can put it on the forehead of your company. Like,
So I wanna double click on what you said about the AI part of it. I ran into a company the other day that did try to use AI to write it, and like they just went straight into ChatGPT, typed in a control, and it spit it out. And I've talked to a couple companies, and I'll come back around on this because I'm as ADD as Kenny. So
that's why I love this.
So I'm going to come back to that in
We
just
know
a
each
second,
other.
but just to say, like, our policy is actually very, very simple. It's a one-sentence policy. Never use AI for anything you can't validate, right? That's it. You don't have to say anything else, period. So they used ChatGPT to write their package and failed the audit miserably. They're like, but
Shocker.
I copied everything word for
Weird
word.
how that works.
How did we fail the audit? I was like, let me see it. And I started reading. I was like, whoa, what was the prompt? Like, so if
Give me
you're an
FedRAMp.
Well,
Give me FedRAMP now.
But
Now.
this goes back to the right tools in the right hands is a powerful thing. You put ChatGPT into a senior FedRAMP consultant or previous auditor or whatever, and they're going to be able to manage 10 to 20 packages at a time because they know what they're doing. They can validate what's written and correct it. Versus somebody who's never done this, who doesn't understand the 4 C's, right? Clear, concise, consistent, complete. FedRAMP 4 C's. In addition to the who, what, when, where, and obviously the how. But those things are one of the biggest messages that the FedRAMP PMO had to get across in the early years because people were just copying and pasting the control statements and then putting, like, if the control statement had a requirement around like maybe account management, right? Number of lockout attempts and things like that. They would take it, copy, paste it, put the company name in the front, and then that was it.
Yep. The organization implements whatever, like implementation statement.
implements the following control in the
on a need-to-know basis.
But in short, I think Matt Goodrich and team did a good job in those early years. They really, believe it or not, they had to spend the bulk of their time educating the community on how to write. So they started producing like these YouTube videos and training videos, like the 300 series, 200 series, and whatnot. So they had CSP videos, agency videos, 3PAO videos on how to write a control, how to write an SSP, understanding responsibilities. And that seemed to be one of the biggest problems the PMO faced 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We see actually CMMC is kind of dealing with that now. We had a conversation just last week with the C3PAO that said they've gotten some packages that were clearly written by ChatGPT because every response is like, we deeply value security, and like
with little emojis on the side of a rocket ship and a star.
To be fair, I remember, when I was implementing FedRAMP, I was talking to, 3PAOs and people in the PMO at that time that were saying like, oh, I'm like, wait a minute, let me get this straight. If I just write that my company implements this, like basically the statement, I'm just going to regurgitate that, then it's not a documentation issue. But I'm explaining to you how I implement it, like right below. And, that totally makes sense. I'm explaining, you asked me, what is the solution and how is it implemented? But you're saying, if I just say this statement up here, that the lockout and all that stuff and deny by default and all these other like words that are, I'm like, it's in the freaking control. I'm like, you're telling me that if I do that, then we're good. And they'd be like, yes. And I'd be like, wow, that's crazy. I think it's different now.
Remember those moments, and I also remember what we used to, so I'm probably going to be hated for this by the people that know this, but we used to say that the PMO was like a box of chocolates because you never know what you're going to get.
On the day.
Yes,
Yeah,
on a daily basis.
on a daily.
And we went down this road of early on of saying, okay, I'm going to email info at FedRAMP. Here's the question before we implement and deploy this, because there's some ambiguity a little bit to the control. And we're like, okay, if we do it this way, will you perceive an issue? And get a response back. Yes, if you do it that way, that will be accepted, blah, blah, blah. But then a 3PO comes along and says, and you're like, email. So then you show them it, and they're like, well, I guess if the 3PO said it's okay, then you get back in front of the PMO, and they're like, we never said, no, go back and fix it. And so that wasn't uncommon. And that's a 6-month turnaround you're talking about too. Then you got pissed off customers, you got struggles. And so I've been on both sides, so assessment and advisor. And from the last, decade plus of doing FedRAMP, it's been a process of, once it's accepted and widely accepted, right, that becomes the gold standard. It's solidified, and those controls stay that way. And what's interesting is as you train new consultants who see it and read it and want to improve it, and I'm like, it's not broken. Do not fix that statement. You leave it the way it is. But I don't understand. All right, I'll explain it, but you're not changing it. So, I mean, we achieved that approach. But to your point, Kenny, the implementation can be incorrectly written, but not implemented, right? So as long as it's deployed correctly, configured correctly, and implemented, you can get past those PL2 findings from an SSP perspective. What you can't have is a terrible implementation that's well documented, right? And so it's that scenario that I think we ran into for a number of years where people were just so focused on writing an immaculate package, which there is no such thing, but they would write a fantastic SSP that was glorious, and then the system just had holes all over it, right?
Thinking of that Tommy Boy statement, I could take a dump in the box and mark it guaranteed.
Slap on a warranty.
But then doesn't he like mess it up? Wouldn't you want to take the butcher's word for it or something? He's like, wait, I
You
mean,
could stick your head up a butcher's ass.
it's gotta be your ball.
So we are at a really interesting time though, because you think of Google, Azure, AWS, and I'll even throw Oracle and IBM in there, to say that each one has really invested in providing so many authorized services in their environment that an ISV can come move in sort of like that all-inclusive resort in Maui. You could obtain everything you need. DNS, firewalls.
Waterfalls, lazy river.
There you go. Even better than
Sea
a firewall.
turtles.
But you can get all the services you need
Warm
in one
water.
location that are all authorized. So then you just have to build and work on yourself as a company, right? And focus on your internal things like supply chain and SDLC.
Well, it is security by design, right? Starting at the very beginning, because even if you have all of these tools set up, it's not idiot proof, right? You still have to do the dishes, right? You still have a responsibility to run things. So you say we go like 60, 70% of the way, but there's still responsibilities that everybody's going to have to do, at the very beginning. So starting from that, at the very beginning, what is the data coming in? What are the people, process, and tech that this thing is touching, so that you can have a better outcome there?
Yeah, the data is where it all begins, right? What is the data, right? What's the federal data? The risk levels and the categorization. So, I mean, the biggest thing we've seen lately is people who don't have a sponsor who want to enter FedRAMP because they've seen an RFP and they don't understand the classification or the type of data that they're managing, right? They just have a service and they do well commercially, and they're like, we could succeed on the federal side. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, if I could tell you how many times I've warned certain folks of saying, if the government's never asked for it, they're probably never gonna. But that being said, the high baseline, for example, right, which is typically criminal, financial, law enforcement, PHI, PII, things of that transaction-based type stuff.
That's a lot of the places. That's a lot of the government data, right?
It is, but
important.
high systems, well, not
High
that you
systems.
can't make any system high, right? It's up to you, FIPS 199 and watermark aside. The companies that go high because they can get 5% more in revenue, okay. Or you could get 95 at moderate and be happy. Which is to say 80%, the numbers are still, they fluctuate a couple percent here and there, but the majority of the FedRAMP systems out there are moderate. The other thing that's important to note that I think people get a little misled on is the marketplace, right? So I think we're at around 400 systems. I didn't look today. Okay, there's way more than that out there, right? So the private clouds don't get reported. The one-off clouds don't get reported. The DoD clouds are not in the marketplace. They're in their own approved products listing for DISA and DoD. My point is to say there's a lot more than 400 cloud systems the government's using, right?
They have all of their own systems that have to ATO as well.
Yeah, well, and prior to the codification, it was FISMA versus FedRAMP, right? And the best description, which I can't remember who told it to me, but the simplest way to determine whether or not an agency was going to go FISMA or FedRAMP was who's paying the bills. Government's paying the bills, FISMA. You pay the bills, well, that's FedRAMP. So the problem is different baselines, different control sets used different way. And so we had this thing we called FISMA and FedRAMP, which later, it was a derogatory term for us, but FISRamp. So what we did, because you're sort of bastardizing the system and trying to achieve a certified cloud that isn't following FedRAMP. It's following FISMA. And even if you use the higher bar, whether it's a configuration setting or implementation, you're building a less secure system because there's 65 less controls on the moderate side.
Okay.
Interesting. So you're saying there are cloud products being used that are getting FISMA, not FedRAMP, but it is still a private cloud product. Because FISMA's FedRAMP's the law.
They're typically agency projects, right?
Got it.
Agency contracts where the agency has
Like
requested
an agency
FISMA.
ATO. Got it.
But what's interesting is that the stigma, Ashley Mahan was the FedRAMP evangelist for a number of years before becoming director and heading over to TTS. She had to basically go around and kind of educate agencies to say, it's the same thing. We're doing the same thing with additional controls to account for cloud, right?
What is the gap there between FISMA and FedRAMP, right? So we say 65 controls. So what are some of the things that people don't know about, like our listeners?
Well, if we I think that the stigma around cloud alone is enough to deter some agencies. I can tell you this much, and I'll come back to it real quick, but we've every year we've gone in and looked, and there's really 8 to 10 agencies that are doing 80% of the authorizations. Now, the last time I looked, there were 43 unique agencies. If you go into the FedRAMP marketplace and do a little CSV dump, and it'll give you everything, and you filter it, and then you pivot table that bad boy into a pie chart, and you're like, holy crap, there's really 7 companies doing the bulk of that work. And we're talking about the measurement I used for those 10 is if they did 2 or more, right? So that means the rest of them are all doing like one the USDA to date only has one actually true authorization. Many reuses.
Is
They're
that like
reusing products.
AWS or something? What is it? Do you know what it is?
No.
I
I'm
wanna
talking about
look.
like actual sponsorship.
Yeah.
So reauthorizations don't count
Oh, okay.
in my book. Well, because they didn't actually sponsor it. They
Right.
reauthorized it.
They just reauthorize.
You can make a case to say, well, it is technically a sponsorship, sure. But to come back to your original question now on the FISMA side, in relation to that, agencies understood FISMA. They've been doing it since 2002. They got it. They know what RMF is, which rolled around in 2006. So when they hear and see FISMA, they think, oh, I know what that is. 853, these families, we've been doing it for 20 years. We can handle that. They don't understand that FedRAMP is essentially the same thing for cloud with risk management built in. And that's important because it's not a compliance framework. It's a risk management framework. And so I was with an agency in the PMO where the agency CIO kind of regurgitated that back and said, hey, folks, we accept the risk. And there were some risk-related items. operationally required risks. But
I love ORs. I can't fix that. That's a feature, not a bug.
it is a beautiful feature. I think it's one of the best, especially if it's used wisely and the agencies get it. So the additional controls on top of that really have to do with what I say are more configuration management, cloud-oriented, backup and recovery, supply chain and acquisition related type elements. But to that point, we talked earlier about that 60 to 70%. I used to tell folks that FedRAMP is about the company. We're really auditing the company. The product is such a small portion, to the point that I had one agency that was very frustrated when I was doing assessment work because the product didn't work. And they said, "You're a 3PAO. How could you let this happen?" I said, "I'm not a user acceptance testing. We are here for security testing, penetration testing. We're evaluating the company. The product is secure, even though it didn't work. The company's doing all the right things. Yes, we recommend that you authorize it. The fact that it doesn't work, that's between you two, right?" So that was one of the biggest complaints in the beginning.
We're hitting on it right off the bat. Security and product. Security is at odds with the progress of your product very often, because implementing security controls doesn't necessarily make the user experience better. It makes it a little bit tougher because there's more steps to jump through. And so that is where security architecture is so important. How do you make this delightful? How do you make this something that's easy to do, so that people do the right thing? Because if you add any friction on doing a control, that control is going to fail, right?
So we're speaking a little bit historically of how we kind of got from there to here. And I will say this. The market is matured, and by market, we're talking about the ISVs and CSPs out there. You don't see too many new infrastructures popping up. There's plenty of platform and platform SaaS. So we used to see infrastructure platform or platform SaaS before we saw the big wave of the last 5 years of really ISVs coming in. They have read, they've seen the lessons learned, they're educated, they're smart, they get budgets before they go out and try to do this now, which is awesome. Because a lot of times when they find out, they're like, "Wait, this costs how much?" Yeah. So they do their homework, right? And even at StackArmor, the first little bit, when I kind of went on our sort of speaking tour was do your homework, right? Understand what you're getting into. Because even though, we talked about all the projects I've done over the years, in the first couple years, I've had customers quit halfway because they were just exhausted. And they're like, if it's this much work just to get ready. And I was like, well, back when FedRAMP took 9 months, I said, yeah, wait till you have the baby. Because when you get that ATO, that's really where the hard work in life begins, because you're on the hook now for everything.
Yeah. Still to this day, in a lot of ways. I mean, that's why a lot of customers come our way, like in your way as well, right? It's still really hard to do.
Well, my favorite is, what's the analogy? You can't throw 9 doctors at a pregnant woman and get a baby in a month, right? And sometimes people try to do that with FedRAMP. Now, in theory, yes, if there's no problems to solve or engineering solutions that have to be worked out, maybe you could accelerate things tremendously. But there's still a period of evidence, performance. You've got to have something to audit, right? So no 3PO is going to take you on the day after the system was built. So there's still work to do. It does take time, but planning properly and knowing all that stuff. So kind of coming back around to what we each do in terms of acceleration, right? We accelerate the design and deployment, where you guys accelerate the documentation piece, which just made that a really beautiful combination.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And the PMO and FedRAMP overall is embracing, obviously, the idea of accelerating with FedRAMP 20X. So as someone who's been in it since the beginning and seen kind of the evolutions and the changes, I think we've talked a few times on a few episodes now what's been proposed, but what do you see Like if you were gonna, take a look into the future, what do you see? What do you see FedRAMP looking like in a year, 2 years, 5 years? What do you think actually changes, and what do you think doesn't?
Can I answer that two ways? I'm going to answer with what I see and what I'd like to see. So, and then what I think will happen, right? Um, so I think Pete is headed in the absolute right direction. He's got a very good vision. I think that the administration is behind him with the leadership of the GSA. In that obviously, we're all aware of the backlog and the fact that the backlog has been tremendously remediated in a logical fashion. And there's many of us who, as either previous advisors or current 3POs, who are kind of like, we are very excited about it. We would love to have seen this sooner, but we also know that that was a little bit out of everyone's control, so to speak. I think it took this administration to make something like that happen. So what do I see coming down the road? I see a future where low and moderates don't require sponsorship, potentially operate in the way that StateRamp, GovRamp is operating today, right? Where you can go through the process without a sponsor. And essentially that first agency kind of becomes your adjunct sponsor, so to speak. But I also see the potential for agencies to do things differently, like what goes on with FISMA. So not every agency handles FISMA the same way, or even RMF. The beauty of FedRAMP is that you know what you're getting because everybody's doing it the same way, right? And the expectations, and the PMO regulated that and ensured it. I think that they will get where they want to go in terms of making this the responsibility of the agencies to take care of it all. But I also think you're going to end up potentially with having to take a package to every agency because the next one may not do it the same.
Yeah.
Or focus on the same controls or have the same concerns.
That is a fear we hear from a lot of our clients that work with multiple agencies. Is they're like, it feels like they're saying for them, it feels like a step backwards almost in that regard, because FedRAMP was created to say, oh, do it once, everyone will use it. We had one client that was like, so wait, you're telling me I have to have 14 SSPs and do 14 separate POAM things to make sure every agency's okay with it? And it's like, well,
that's
maybe
where the
not.
do once,
That's
like the original mantra was do once, use many times.
Right.
And I think what I think was beautiful about FedRAMP, and it's still beautiful today because it's happening today, is its ability to evolve and adapt, right? Where FISMA, and even it's an act of Congress basically, right? So, in '02 when FISMA came out, it was to overcome the fact of, like, you remember the periods where Congress and everybody was testifying for a $400 hammer and a $200 toilet seat, and what are we buying? And it was the same thing with computers, right? They didn't know what they were buying, but they were spending millions of dollars on devices that they had no idea what the security was. So then here comes FISMA. Well, then it was that 1 day a year snapshot where people basically, or I'm sorry, organizations were lax in security, and they're like, oh, the annual's coming up. Oh, let's run that scan. And then we'll remediate it. And it's like, what did you do for the last 11 months, right? That is a great example of the potential of where we could be going, right? Is the concern around folks potentially cutting corners or only dealing with controls or only doing what they need to at that moment because they know that that agency only cares about this, or that that's all that's going to be looked at instead of the full 100%, 323 controls or 410 at high, whatever the baseline is. I think the future of Conmon is where I have the most, like the most highest expectations and hope. I'm not worried about systems being audited. I think all that'll get streamlined and get where it needs to be. I think that's going to be one of the biggest benefits we get out of this is faster adoption, faster to ATO, faster audits. Okay. Conmon is where the real work is, and that is where the potential for breaches and spillages and things like that occur. So let's put assessment and authorization aside and talk about security operations and maintaining. There's a lot of talk about the POAMs and reading through an Excel sheet and going through all these. That's critical. Like, that's critical. I know everybody hates it, but you guys have a solution. There's lots of solutions and ways to handle that more efficiently. But I can tell you, like you said, having to deal with 14 potential different POAMs or present the package to 14 different agencies differently, yeah, that's a nightmare situation.
Yeah.
Absolute nightmare, because you have a lot of like duplication. How do you say duplicate? Like 16
Duplication.
times? Like if you duplicate it like 16 times, is there a word for that?
Duplicatify.
Yeah, man.
Duplicatify.
I mean, that's-
Duplicify.
So we just start a new company.
We're starting a new word. Well, but here's the other
This could
thing,
be good.
though. This is what I think is really important: is POAMs haven't changed in over 20 years, right? I think we're coming up on 25 here soon. But the plan of action milestone tool is such a functional tool in that it's such a great way to handle remediation, to track it, to understand it, to identify the cause, to who's responsible. It's awesome. If you didn't have one, some project management somewhere or PM is going to create one and give you like a race it or raid log and say, because that's basically what it is, right? Minus the responsible, accountable, whatever. So I don't think getting rid of the POAM is a good idea. I think it's a necessary tool, but it can be managed efficiently.
Well, and essentially the POAM, when you take a step back, really, like the whole idea of everything from gap assessment to continuous ATO to POAMs, it's all the same thing, right? It's just saying, where's your system at compared to where it should be at any given point?
Well, yeah, your risk exposure table being that number one critical, the first thing anybody looks at in an audit, right? Coupled with, the POAM is there as a communication tool to explain the current risks to the authorizing official and the PMO that you're working with at an agency level, right? Here's the findings. Get rid of the highs as soon as you can, right? And you got your moderates and lows and whatever. But the ability to have a deviation request, right? To say, okay, we can't fix this, but
We have
of
an excuse.
Yeah.
A good excuse.
defense in depth, vendor dependencies. It could be, okay, well, it's a 0 day or whatever. It's as good of a tool for communication as it is for managing the actual vulnerabilities,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to beat this dead horse, right? But like what we see still to this day, and I don't see this going away, is we have a lot of acquisitions at some of the big companies that we help out, right? So we do almost, I would say 70%, 80% is big enterprise, right? Would you still to this day? And what you have is a lot of SKUs underneath their FedRAMP authorization. And what the agencies want is like, I don't care about X product. I don't care about the whole suite. If you say that this company is FedRAMP and everything in here is covered, I want to know about the POAMs that are affecting my SKU that I buy. And so being able to divvy that up, I mean, you're always going to have that problems. You have to start at the very beginning. You have to know. Again, it goes back to it. I'm going to say it again. Data. What are the people, process, and tech that it's touching at the very beginning, and being very clear about which stacks are affected, by the different risks at the very beginning. So that has been always a real core focus of, for Paramify is how do we make it easy to slice and dice that at the very beginning. So doing it manually, no way.
So-
Yeah, you got to get tools.
It's funny. So I don't know. I have to believe that it probably works in a similar fashion at Google and Azure and some of the others. But I was at a reInvent a few years back with the AWS FedRAMP compliance team, and during the presentation, they had mentioned that every AWS service has an individual POAM, is tracked individually. They do not have one POAM to rule every service underneath it, because that's the way the ATO works. So everybody just assumes that there's one giant. No, that would be insane. So they do exactly what you're saying. Each service or SKU has its own POAM, and then there's a team managing it. So you can only imagine how large that team must be.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's super huge. But it's the implementation and the assurance. And so it can't just be like, oh, I'm just monitoring this product. It starts at the very beginning. And if you don't, it's going to suck, right? It will suck really bad, right?
So we built a component within ours because over the years, we have exponentially grown each year, not quite doubled just about each year, but since we started doing the threat alert service we provide today back in 2020, um, it became a necessity to manage POAMs more efficiently. And so we started pulling the POAMs into configuration management system and automating them. And we got from what used to be 15 to 20 minutes an item down to 15 to 20 seconds. We batch process items. We batch process scans. Any findings, we handle the POAM directly from within there, including deviation requests. We generate the templates. And then by proxy, the inventory comes from there. But we did it because we needed it, because it's such a pain in, am I allowed to say ass? So
I already
know,
said
did.
it, so we'll have the bleep button ready. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Nice.
We'll just bleep it out
feel
for
like-
the kids.
I feel like 1990s
For
TV
Homeschool Boy
when they
11.
would get fined for swearing on TV. But anyway, so when we built it, it was to save time and effort not only on our end but on the customer's end, and has turned out to be one of our greatest solutions, right? Because everything else, zero trust, multi-factor, configuration management, auditing, logging, that's pretty standardized.
Their
Mhm.
capabilities, right? That you got to have.
While we're talking products, you guys just launched a new product, announced it at Google Next
The Armory.
last week. Let's talk about it.
We did. Yeah. What an exciting time. So what's awesome is a year ago at the second Google Next, we had basically discussed and talked about this, and the request was to build a hosted, an environment that could offer hosted and managed ATOs. There are many companies that have done this sort of thing, Project Host on Azure. You've got companies like Second Front, Uber Ether, Palantir, but nobody's done it on Google, right? And on GCP in a way that, one, allowed folks to deploy their product their way without having to conform, but two, offer the ability to what we kind of describe as graduate out. So you can start out as a hosted solution that has no sponsor, that needs to be, whether you're an agency or CSP, but who needs an environment that is FedRAMP authorized that they can sell from. Alternatively, if they get a sponsor down the road and they want to own it, they can graduate out and become an authorized product or authority to operate ATO'd product, while still inheriting from the Armory. So when GCP added all those services and raised everything to high, and then added the IL5, dang it, I forgot what it's called, the not BCP, Boundary Cloud, BCAP. Sorry, Boundary Cloud Access Point. So
Sorry, I didn't jump in because I just wanted to see if you
I
would
didn't
get
jump
it.
in because I didn't know.
Well, it's a huge benefit. I mean, the things that they're doing, I think, well, some folks can make comments and say, well, GCP was a little, they weren't necessarily, I don't think they relate to the game. I think that they've always been around. The things that they've done have taken notes and lessons learned from the other competitors of theirs. And as they built out these new service offerings, they have opened the door wide open for they're offering high side across public. Like, it's incredible the things that they're doing. So when we took note on, okay, where are we going to build this? Are we going to put it in AWS where there's already 5 companies doing the exact same thing and it's a difficult operation, or Azure where there's 4 companies doing it, or let's go somewhere that it hasn't been done yet? So Google Cloud was a choice. So it is now FedRAMP ready. Quantipi is our first customer in the environment. So yeah, we are working towards sponsorship. And I say that wholeheartedly, which is to say we had sponsors in place prior to January. It is what it is. But from that aspect, I'm not concerned about that. We'll get that knocked out. But it is an environment where agencies can put their solutions, services, whatever it is they want to design or build, or ISVs as well. Because there's a lot of small companies out there who have products that other CSPs need that an agency would never sponsor, right? Or for example, it would be like 1 in a million if they were able to work that out. With the jab gone, that kind of eliminates a critical path, but there is that trusted authorizing agency component that's coming down the road. That's going to be built of those agencies we talked about, the ones that are doing the bulk of the work. That, Pete has described a scenario where, okay, based on the type of system, this agency will do it. Okay, we're going to send it over to this agency, and sort of matchmaking. I hope that happens because it seems like the smartest thing that they could do.
Yeah.
I agree.
That's awesome. Congrats on the launch. That's huge.
Thank you.
Very
Yeah.
cool. So of all the weapons in the armory, which one is your favorite and why is it Paramify?
That's awesome. So my favorite is Paramify, and it's because I'm here. So
No social pressure in this situation.
And because of the burger.
Yeah. Yep.
That's good. That's good. So yeah, I mean, that's probably a really good critical point. I mean, you've got the mandates out there for OSCAL. We launched the OSCAL Foundation earlier this year. You've also got Pete and team looking for ways to accelerate this process, and tools like Paramify and OSCAL are, to me, one of the greatest ways to accelerate not only the transmission and receipt of the package, but the communication between the 3PAO and the CSP, in addition to transmitting SAP, SARS, POAM, not just the SSP. I don't know that we finished where I think things are going, but where I think things will go is I think we're going to reach a point where you're going to transmit that package over OSCAL. It's going to be important that an AI is going to take a look at it. An AI is going to scan through and read the package and then identify key areas where a human cybersecurity expert will review it because it's been flagged. Either because the AI couldn't make sense of it or it caught a problem, but it can't make the decision. So then a human edits it, reads it, transmits back. 3PAO, CSP receive it, agency receives it. So I think the future of an ecosystem for OSCAL is inevitable. I also think there eventually will be a marketplace for products to place their component definitions, right? So if I used Okta as an example, hopefully don't pick on me, but I think Okta is a great example of controls that can be inherited and leveraged and configured, and you could create those definitions, and anybody that uses Okta just take those definitions and you just drop them in OSCAL.
Yep. And then you also need to factor in that Okta doesn't exist on an island. It integrates with other components within a system. So having a way at the very beginning that's capabilities focused to be like, hey, let's plug in the right capability. How do you implement? Are you using Active Directory? How does that sync with Okta? All of that stuff matters. Who's doing it? And I'm excited for that future. We really are going to a phase where you're able to do more with less, which is what we need. That's what's exciting about AI. So the people that are really scared of AI and are just worried about wanting to do a job that kind of sucks, right? It's just not very interesting and we're not growing. That's going to be a tough world, in the future to live in. But if you are embracing AI and its new capabilities, if you are embracing tools like Paramify, like Armory, like StackArmor, if you're looking forward to embracing new tools, you're going to be able to do a lot more with less. And then, we continue on until,
You're describing a conversation Johan and I had.
The singularity? Were you talking about that?
Yeah. It essentially was around our first reaction from ChatGPT. We went in there and we did a SC7 experiment, and we dropped just a little bit of key information into ChatGPT and said, okay, create a SC7 control response based on the following FedRAMP baseline, and it cranked it out within 2 seconds. And it was 80% viable. It wasn't bad. And then we said, okay, now generate it in OSCAL. And we were like, uh-oh. because it cranked it, and we were like, holy crap, we're out of a job, right? But we're not out of a job. What we are is it's a force multiplier, like in your do more with less mentality. In the right hands, trained properly, an individual can do a greater amount of work, but it still requires somebody to do the work, right? Somebody's still got to make the request and understand what they're asking and implement it. But I think the other key thing is somebody's got to make the prompts, right? Or ask the questions or understand the environment. So it's not enough to just tell ChatGPT, I'm using Splunk, AppGate, Nessus, and GitLab. Now make me a package. or on AWS GovCloud using the following services. I think there's a lot that can be done that route, but I also will tell you, like I told you about the horror stories of the companies that tried to create SSPs that way. I have a friend who's a consultant that made a comment to me of how their business is going and what they're doing. And they're like, well, if you want me to do it, it costs this much. If you want me to do it with AI, it costs this much. And there's a time difference, right, for each one, depending on how quickly you need it. And I was like, wow, that's a interesting perspective, but I think it's a necessary approach that those of us who have been around this long and doing it are falling into is, okay, like you said, adapt and go with it or get left behind.
Yep. I mean, as one of the people that, I started my company with like, hey, you want me to do it? And I was definitely using tools, and I had some know-how and some technology and how I could put it together. But yeah, those first iterations are pretty embarrassing. They're pretty bad. But then when they're like, we love it, I'm like, all right, sounds good. Fair enough.
Yeah,
But it's gotten a lot better.
Well, and I think there are some really fantastic AI tools out there. But to that degree, I mean, we make sure we have a policy also. Every tool we use is a FedRAMP tool. Which is funny because when customers show up and they're like, I have this great tool that does this. I was like, cool, is it FedRAMP? So not yet, but it is. So I know, right? That would be so awesome. But to that degree, I was gonna say Smartsheet, I think, is an example of a tool that pre-OSCAL is something a lot of folks kind of jumped on and wanted to manage controls in, but it didn't work well because exports, right? So at that point, then you're just back to Word docs and Excel. So again, this is pre-OSCAL, but it was sort of like the great hope jumping beyond Excel into it, or SharePoint, right? But you had all kinds of sort of limitations. It's great for the management, the design, the creation, but not the implementation.
I mean, for OSCAL adoption, I think it's going to succeed in some way, shape, or form. It will, absolutely. The next step is, if you want it to be like HTML was, right? You had like great tools. You had Netscape, that said, oh yeah, like it could understand HTML and it could create this awesome web page, right? And that's where the tools will come into play, right? If we make it easy to adopt OSCAL, I think that's the way. So it's really up to us in the industry to make that happen. We're going to make it happen. It's going to be great. You want to come?
I'll be there. Yeah.
Count me in.
All right. Sounds good. Man, this is awesome. We're going to have to do it again. Maybe we'll do it yeah.
Heck yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate
thanks for having me.
Yeah. Before we go, tell us a little bit more. How do we find out more about StackArmor and Armory and all these cool things that you guys are doing?
So StackArmor.com, StackArmor, all one word, is us first and foremost, and then /Armory will get you to the Armory page. But you can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and of course the interwebs.
Yeah, you can.
But yeah, we welcome anyone and everyone. Please feel free to reach out. We support every type of deployment. We even support on-prem. A couple other fun facts. We built 12 cybersecurity centers of excellence for the government across White House, GSA, USDA, Navy, Air Force.
I've heard of them.
And then we also do AI/ML workshops. We are part of the ATO for AI working groups, as well as AI for RMF. So from the beginning, We've been supporting those developments as well. And the good news is I also think the government's kind of settled down and realized that AI is really it's a system, right? We didn't need to go overboard, but of course the pillars, secure, resilient, um, um, not impartiality, I forgot the word, but bias, right? Transparency, all those key things. At the end of the day, it's still a system. So I'm looking forward. This is another sort of Pete initiative. I'm looking forward to seeing more AI systems get authorized.
They will. We're going to do it. Like I said, I'm going to be there. Be there. Guys, thanks so much for listening. Martin, thanks for coming out.
Thank you for having me. All right.
Ciao.
Swing.